Hey guys, how's it going? So, I thought I'd make this little Phantasm guide because I think a lot of people have been having trouble with it. It can be a little rough to climb, and I think running the Phantasm made me way better at the game overall, just understanding how to really play the combat, how to abuse some of the systems that are in place, and really utilize everything that you have. So I thought I'd talk about that. And I've also wanted to talk about how to get stronger for the Bygone Phantasm as well. So first of all, one of the most important things is your CS. Like pretty much overall, the higher CS, the better, right? It's not the end all be all, but if you can't hit enough damage, you're not going to be able to kill some of the floors, even if you play it really, really well, and it can make things really difficult. Obviously, this combat score includes stuff like health and defense and things like that that aren't really as important in the Bygone Phantasm, but you still have to pay attention to those kinds of things. So these are the stats they had right now. I finished floor 100 last night, and overall it went pretty well. But let's talk about some of the things that you can do to improve your character. So first of all, I guess I'll start with weapons. So I currently have 3-star the Dualium Stars and 3-star Venus. So overall, that sounds like some real whale stuff, right? But even though they are really strong, and each star does increase the base stats by a significant amount, you do still have to keep in mind that matrices are one of the biggest improvements to your entire combat score and your just damage output whatsoever, right? I don't have some of the really insane ones like the 6-star here, and obviously the 6-star of her would have been really big as well, just for the overall damage output, but this is still pretty big, right? We did spend money to get the Nemesis. As for these, we just kind of got lucky, and I have a 1-star Huma that I happened to get. But overall, if you spend a little bit of money, you would be able to get the Nemesis, and then this was just luck. There are people that have spent almost nothing that have been able to get similar stuff, so I just wanted to get that out of the way, so you don't just assume that, oh, this is just whale stuff, like that's all that matters, right? So, first of all, the stats of all these combined add to your combat score and overall just make you a lot stronger, so obviously the stars increase that as well. Next, let's look at the matrices. So I don't really have any matrix sets at all. I haven't done any rolls on the matrix things except for just free matrix rolls that we happen to have gotten from playing the game. And I somehow got 2 of these, which is honestly a really crummy matrix set. It's actually almost completely worthless for me, especially in the Bygone Phantasm, so it doesn't really add much other than stats. So overall, the only sets that I have is this one, which I use on the guns to be able to get more weapon charge faster, right? And then this is basically completely useless for me. So I just leveled them to be able to increase the overall stats that I'm getting, because all of these are giving you stats like crit or attack, and that's increasing your combat score, making my character overall stronger. And it's okay to level them somewhat, like some of these junky ones and ones you're not going to be using late game. It's fine to level them, just don't level them too far, because I think past level 30 or so is where they start to have diminishing returns when you feed it into something else. So, you know, if you don't want to waste the experience, just keep them like that. So that all helps, right? But then a really big thing that a lot of people don't pay much attention to, especially early on, is enhancing their gear. Because the thing is, you're enhancing the gear slot when you're doing this. So if I swap these wristbands for something else, I'm going to still have level 10 in this slot. So it's totally fine to level these things using all of these booster modules. In the Crystal Dust store, it's worthwhile buying as many booster modules as possible, and it's worthwhile buying out all the advancement modules as well. That'll let you level up your stuff way faster and easier. Highly recommend it. As for advancement, people just kind of say it's not really worth it. This is leveling the actual individual piece of gear, and all of the individual pieces of gear we have are junk. So it's not super worthwhile really to level them. I mean, you could if you really wanted to, but there's not really much point. Just make sure you enhance the slot. And so, other than getting these from the Crystal Dust store, you also get them from the Bygone Phantasm. So, by running the Bygone Phantasm, you're going to be getting materials to run the Bygone Phantasm more, pretty much, right? And so, if you look at the rewards, you got booster modules, you get Omnium Crystals to upgrade your suppressor, and then you get advancement modules right there. Like, so all this stuff just compounds on each other, pretty much, to make your character way stronger. So as you're running the Bygone Phantasm, you're going to be getting upgrades to upgrade the stuff to then run it more. Now, for this kind of gear, make sure that you upgrade stuff like the boots first, because if you look, the boots give attack, the pants give resistance. We don't care about that. Every time you level something to max like this and you do the breakthrough, this is always worthwhile doing. Like, look, this gives an extra 15 attack, for instance, right? So make sure that you upgrade the stuff that gives attack. Boots are the best, and I believe helm is the worst in terms of attack. And then gloves also give some, and the wristbands give some. All the other ones are defensive other than the shoulder guards. So make sure you upgrade all the ones giving attack first, advance them, and then you start upgrading the other things. Because all that really matters in the Bygone Phantasm is damage. If you can dodge the things, it doesn't really matter how much health you have overall, other than you can maybe eat a couple of hits, right? So pretty much that's the basis of just upgrading your character to get all the damage. Something else just to keep in mind is the weapon resonances. So I have a balanced one. Fortitude just completely destroys shields, just completely obliterates them, while the attack one gives a small damage boost. Personally, I kind of like the balance. Also, it just happens to be what weapons I like to use as well. If I used King's Scythe, I would instead have the attack resonance, and I would lose some of the shatter. But overall, I kind of like the balanced one that I have, and Fortitude was kind of fun too. But pay attention to that as well. Now, something important to know is some of the rotations of your abilities and like what discharge you really want to use. So if you're using King, for instance, people usually like to not really use the Scythe until it has the discharge ability available, and then they swap to the Scythe, use the discharge, use the first skill, and then swap off of it. As for me, I decided that dual EM stars is going to be my main discharge thing, so I pretty much try to spam this ability as much as possible. So some simple little tricks that you can possibly do is, let's say you have 2 bars full. What you can do is you can swap to the weapon, which activates the discharge ability, and then immediately you want to swap to another weapon, like let's say the shield right here, attack once, and then you can swap back to the gun that you want to use, or whatever weapon, and it'll use the discharge ability, you swap, and then it'll use the discharge ability again. So you can kind of abuse just spamming one ability as much as possible. That's something I do actually quite a bit in the Bygone Phantasm. Also, keep note, some weapons have abilities that a lot of people don't really use all that often. Like, for instance, this one. This ability is incredibly strong on Nemesis, and a lot of people I don't see abusing it that much, but it creates a slowing field that slows things by, I think, 30%. And that works on bosses and stuff too. And especially if you stun an enemy, and then you put them in the slowing field, they're just stunned for 30% longer. All that kind of stuff is incredibly useful. Also, in Bygone Phantasm, make sure that you actually have your relics. I only have 2 relics that I really care about for damage. I use the missiles, and I use the tornadoes, magnetic storm or whatever it's called. And, you know, as we get more, you'll be able to utilize more. From the SSR selector, you could get one that's useful, possibly the one that sucks enemies in. And I think we get the hologram one for free, so it's not worthwhile. Actually, I think that one's not on the ticket, but as we get more relics, we'll be able to do a lot more damage. You'll be able to swap to your next palette of relics like right there, and then just have a ton of damage relics that you get to just spam, pretty much. But these are some of the important facts. Also, you have to think about your resources. So these skills that you use, that's a resource. I found that I really like Huma because this ability, right here, has a 25-second cooldown, so I use this to break shields. I break the shields pretty quickly, and then I swap off, and then usually it's up by the time that the shields come back, which is really useful. That's another reason why I'm not a big fan of King, is because the long cooldown of his first skill. So make sure that you utilize that. And another thing to really utilize is whenever an enemy is attacking you and it gets the red eyes right there, if you dodge, you go into the slow time, and it gives you an entire meter, a full meter, of being able to use your discharge ability. So you really want to abuse that fact, because I think it's approximately every 30 seconds you're able to do that on an enemy, and it makes it so you just get more damage pretty much, and they're slowed, and you dodge the attack, so it's just a huge bonus. So you want to actually utilize that rather than only just never being in an enemy's attack. Sometimes that's a resource that you can utilize to push extra damage, which is really big. Something to note is a lot of people get really pissed at the dodge window, and I do too, because you dodge before the attack, which is incredibly odd, rather than dodging through the attack. But what I found is when the enemy's eyes really shine red, that seems to be the moment that you want to dodge, and pretty much always, every time I dodge at that moment, it seems to work. So that's just kind of my recommendation. Now, there are a couple of enemies in the Bygone Phantasm that are incredibly frustrating. There is the Frostbot. Frostbot is just the absolute worst. Nobody ever wants to fight that thing. It completely sucks. And the other enemies are this big mech with these 2 armored lizards. And they're just unbelievably tanky, so frustrating to fight. You'll often see people get just completely stuck in the rankings at certain floors. If we look at the rankings right now and ignore, like, I don't know, these cheaters or whatever. Then we look down, like, where I am about. So, some of us are stuck at floor 100 right now. Definitely have some trouble with this floor, just because the grouping of the enemies has been a little annoying. I just need to get a little extra damage. Maybe, just get a good run where the enemies stay together a little bit more, and I can probably do it. But, some floors just have incredibly hard groups of enemies, and once you get past that, it just becomes a breeze to go the next, like, 10 floors sometimes, even. So just keep that in mind. And I'll definitely say that I think Bygone Phantasm has made me a way better player. Just understanding how to really swap from things, like just be able to utilize everything perfectly. So like, for instance, I really found out how to just really quickly swap between everything. Like I can do that and then do this, utilize the shield charges. It gives you some invincibility frames. Well, not invincibility frames, but rather super armor so that you can actually tank some hits while doing the attacks. Really utilize stuff like this, so like if an enemy's doing a big attack, you can use that and you can't get knocked down while it's happening. Also make sure when you're using your discharge abilities, a lot of the time you won't get knocked down by certain attacks. So really you want to make sure you understand the capability of each ability, and then you can really push as much damage as possible, because that's all that really matters, is pushing damage. Survivability comes second, because overall most of these enemies don't hit that hard. They're just so tanky that you have to kill them in the time limit. So anyways, I have a little clip right here. So here I'm entering level 100 of the Phantasm. I don't have any of the upped weapons. So I use both of my relics immediately, and I swap to the shield so that I get the dodge, which gives me the full bar, so I can swap into the gun for the discharge ability. I swap over to Nemesis weapons just to get some extra damage, put down her pillar, and this is one of my main damage abilities I use with Samir. It's the gun spin. I see I almost have a full bar, so I swap off the weapon so that I can use another discharge with the gun. I use the discharge with the gun as my main damage ability along with the gun spin. I use this to quickly break the shield, and use the iframes from the ability to make it so I can just eat the attack and not really care. That slow field right there from Nemesis is actually something really big. It's really useful against all enemies, bosses, or groups of enemies, doesn't really matter. And I go for another dodge right there. My attack actually goes right through them, unfortunately, but I am able to get the bar to be able to use the gun discharge, and then I chain it into another gun discharge. If you have 2 entirely full bars of discharge ability, then if you use one, the second one will not quite be active yet, and you could quickly swap to another attack, and then be able to swap back to the gun to do a almost double discharge ability. So I'm pretty much just going through the motions of doing the same stuff here, going through my rotations. When I run out of stamina, so I'm not able to do the gun spin, I usually like to swap to this weapon, so that I'm able to put the slow field, get some extra damage down, and also if I get dodge, I'll be able to go into another gun discharge. So I use Huma's shield here to break the shield of the boss pretty simply. I'm not a big fan of King's weapon overall. I think without C1, King's weapon feels very awkward for me, so I don't really like using it. You also really have to use the discharge on it a ton, which I think a lot of the time is a bit of a shame to have to use it only on a shield breaker character. But, so overall, I would say it was a pretty smooth run. Since I didn't get hit by anything that actually staggered me, I was able to just constantly DPS. And I get another slow right here, which lets me go into a gun, so I swap off, and I actually make a mistake and don't swap off fast enough. Sometimes it's server lag, sometimes you just don't hit the button fast enough, and so I used the shield discharge there, but it all ended up being totally fine, and we won anyways. A couple other things I want to talk about is when you're in a stage that actually has a bunch of enemies rather than a boss. So one thing that matters is when you lose, you actually keep the charge from your previous run. Unfortunately, it doesn't just start full, which is actually kind of frustrating, but sometimes it can be best to just lose the floor when you get a bunch of charge and then just retry it. Another thing is sometimes the enemies spawn randomly, and sometimes they get kind of stuck. Like, look at this guy. He was just kind of standing there for a little bit. And it can be really annoying to group them. You really want to try and group them on the same side. And when you do enough damage, they always get shield at a certain point. That's something to keep in mind. So once you've done enough damage, you know that they're going to all get their shields. So then you want to get your shield breaker ready and really start smashing all of those. Another thing to keep in mind is that also the enemies are going to get ungrouped a lot depending on what they are, right? These enemies with the guns here, for instance, they constantly walk backwards. You really want to keep all the enemies on the same side. It becomes incredibly annoying to fight sometimes. If you're in between these enemies, for instance, look, one is going to walk away from the other. So you actually want to keep all of them facing the same way at you. That's the most efficient way of being able to actually group them. Some enemies are more annoying about this than others. This is probably one of the most annoying floors of enemies that do this. So just something to keep in mind when you're trying to fight some of these floors though. So anyways, thanks a bunch for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like on it or subscribe to the channel. And I hope to see you guys next time. Thanks a bunch.